what's really important to know is that not everybody has the same definition of success. So whatever you do, somebody is going to disagree with you. So the only important thing is to find your definition of success, the one that is absolutely correct for you, and follow that and let everything else fall away. Because there is always judgment somewhere coming from you, for you even, if you do deviate off of what is some of these traditional definitions of success. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Life by Your Design podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Boyd. I'm a master hypnotist, human design reader, and I'm here to help you play with convention, tap into your purpose, and live life by your design. Welcome back to the podcast. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and we are almost the whole way through the first month of 2024, which is wild. But I hope your new year has been off to a fantastic start. Today's podcast is going to be all about definitions of success. Now, those of you that know me know I'm a hypnotist, and so a lot of the work that I do with clients is around looking at the beliefs that we have around the life that we're living now and the life that we'd like to live. And when it comes to success, we have a lot of beliefs, conscious and subconscious, around what our success looks like. And when it comes down to actually living life by your design, knowing what your definition of success truly is, not the one that you've been handed by society, not the one you've adopted from different places around yourself, but the one that sits deep inside of you, is absolutely fundamental. Because when you follow your definition of success, some wonderful things happen. Life becomes more easeful, more flowing. And then all of those words that the personal development world loves to throw around, like authenticity, integrity, alignment, purpose, all of those things start to really come alive in you. So in today's podcast, I'm going to be talking about some of the ways that you will see an incorrect definition of success play out. And then I'm also going to be talking to you about where definitions of success come from. So before we dive in, there's going to be 3 different scenarios that I'm going to cover in this podcast. So if any of the next 3 scenarios resonate with you, absolutely stay for the rest of this podcast, because there'll be some true value in here for you. So scenario number 1, which means that you might want to look at your definition of success, is if you are in a place in your life where you have actually achieved a lot of stuff. On paper, you are a successful person, and yet you don't really feel that great. You feel quite dissatisfied. You feel as if it's not quite right, and you don't really feel like you're being true to yourself. That's scenario number 1. Scenario number 2 is that you've decided that it's time to change something in your life, and you may have even tried to change something in your life. But what you're finding is that you're not really getting any momentum up or any real change in those areas that you're trying to transform. And the third area is you don't know what you want. So you may be sat there going, I know something needs to change, but I don't even know what I would like it to be. If that's the case, your current definition of success is actually clouding that process for you. So they're the 3 scenarios we're going to touch on in today's podcast. However, before we get down into that stuff, I want to talk to you a bit about where definitions of success come from. Now, your definitions of success is just another set of beliefs that you have. It's just that they're around a very important part of your life, which is essentially how you mark yourself as to whether you are successful or not successful. It's literally like this checklist that you are at a subconscious level evaluating yourself against all of the time. And of course, it's very important for us to actually be evaluating ourselves against the correct checklist for ourselves and not one that we've adopted from somebody else. And here is the thing. Most of us are actually running to definitions of success that are not ours. And there's implications for that around how we experience life and ultimately how at peace and how happy we feel. So where do definitions of success come from? Well, like all programming, majority of it, the societal conditioning, the programming, actually comes through in the first 7 years of our life. And so in that period of time, when you're a child up to about 7 years, you're actually in the theta brainwave state, which is the hypnotic state, pretty much all the time. So you're like a little sponge and you're absorbing everything. And if you think about how much kids learn, like how quickly they learn and how many things they are learning to become little people, you can see why it's really advantageous to be in that state. And when I'm doing hypnosis with someone, I'm essentially taking them into a state where they can learn how to be the person they want to be much more quickly than when they are in their conscious adult or teenage state. So this is the thing. Most of the programming, most of the learning is actually picked up in those first 7 years. And you'll pick that up from society, your culture, the country you grew up in. Your parents play a pivotal role in that. And then everything else that you're essentially are surrounded with that you as a sponge are starting to absorb. That isn't the only way that we can learn as adults. We do learn in a couple of other ways. One of those is through repetition. So you know that if you want to get good at anything, if you want something to stick, then doing it over and over again is what allows you to build those neural pathways or that programming around that particular thing that you're doing and you're learning. So repetition is key. And then the third other way that we can learn and we could actually start to take on other definitions of success, for argument's sake, or other beliefs, is to do with when we have a very, very heightened emotion. So if you have a very heightened emotion present, you actually only need to experience something once for you to learn something significant from that experience. So an example would be you go through a very emotional breakup with somebody, and in that time when those emotions are absolutely heightened from breaking up, that you learn something about relationships, or you learn something about men or women or what it is to fall in love. Alternatively, for example, you could get bitten by a dog. And in that moment when you're bitten by a dog, the fear is so heightened that you learn something about dogs. Perhaps you learn that dogs are unsafe or dogs are scary, for argument's sake. So there's essentially 3 ways that we learn, but most of our definitions of success are actually going to be first installed in those first 7 years, and then they're going to be compounded and other ones are going to be added as we move through the rest of our life. And as I say, they come from everything that we're exposed to. So your definitions of success are going to be a little bit different depending on where you grew up, the type of society that you grew up in, and the way that your parents are, perhaps the education you received. All of these things are going to shape your definition of success. But broadly speaking, what we can say is that for most of us who've grown up in probably quite similar societies, and I grew up in the UK, and I also have Australian citizenship, I've been here for a decade now, is that there is, you could argue, a fairly standardized, high-level roadmap for success. So what does that roadmap for success look like? And you may listen to this and go, yep, that's the one that I was pretty much given, or it might not fit with you. But for a lot of people, for example, that have had a similar upbringing to myself, it probably goes a little bit like this. The roadmap starts off with you going to school, when you're leaving school, perhaps going to university or getting a trade. And then you move into the workforce and you start to, get job after job where you get progressively more senior, you take on more responsibility, and as such, you earn more money. And so you move your way up through your chosen career or job path. You're also out there buying a house. That tends to be on the roadmap for success. And at some point, you're meeting the love of your life and getting married and having children. And there's usually some kind of ages that are sat around these areas of the roadmap and what deems them to be successful and not successful. Now, of course, when you look at your definitions of success, you can go much more deeply than this. But at a surface level, that is a roadmap that many of us sort of plan our life to. And we move through different milestones on that roadmap. And every time we meet one of those milestones, we're effectively ticking off part of the success on that kind of road or path of life that we are put on. And here's the thing, that roadmap isn't actually correct for everyone. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that roadmap. For some people, those will actually be components of success for them, and they're absolutely right. But they are not for everyone. What's quite interesting is if you look at something like social media, for example, and you look at anyone who has chosen to deviate off of this sort of quite typical roadmap, you will often find that they receive an awful lot of comments from people who are clearly projecting their definition of success onto that person, and as well as projecting it, feel the need to actually voice it. And one of the most interesting bits of content I find, well, it's one for this as an example anyway, is when you find women who are perhaps mid, late 30s, they're into their 40s, they're into their 50s. And these are the women who have chosen not to have children. And so I'm not talking about women who have been unable to have children, but deeply desired that, but it's not been something that's happened for them. I'm talking about the women who have looked at their life and gone, actually, children are not right for me. They're not part of my path. And when these women post content that says that they're happy child-free, that they're living lives that they enjoy, if you click into those comments, you will just see a flurry of people criticizing them because they're not actually following what most people believe is the definition of success for a woman, which is to have a baby. And what I would say here is what's really important to know is that not everybody has the same definition of success. So whatever you do, somebody is going to disagree with you. So the only important thing is to find your definition of success, the one that is absolutely correct for you, and follow that and let everything else fall away. Because there is always judgment somewhere coming from you, for you even, if you do deviate off of what is some of these traditional definitions of success. So let's have a chat about these three different scenarios and the role that the definition of success has in each of them. So scenario number one is where you're actually really successful and you've achieved something. You have met essentially one of the milestones of your definition of success on that roadmap of success, and yet you don't feel great about it. You might get the initial peak, the dopamine hit of the achievement, but afterwards you're like, nah, this doesn't really feel like it's quite right for me. You feel dissatisfied and you feel like you're not really being true to yourself. And for this first scenario, I actually want to use an example from my own life. And what I'm going to use for all of these examples are things off of that high level roadmap that we've just discussed. So the first example here is buying a home. And as I mentioned, I grew up in the UK. I now live in Australia. And I know it's not the case for every country on the earth, but for many countries, owning a home is a real definition of success. It's a real item to tick off of your list. And certainly in the UK and Australia, it's a really, really big thing. And it was definitely drummed into me throughout my childhood that it was something to do was to own my own home. Now, I bought my own home at 28. I bought a one-bedroom flat in Brixton in London. I did it completely on my own. I was deeply in my 20s in my independent woman phase. And if you want to talk about programming, if you think I grew up with the Spice Girls, I think I was 10 when the Spice Girls really hit it big time. So girl power. And then, in my teenage years, Destiny's Child singing Independent Women. And if you actually look at a lot of the music of that era that, a girl of my age would have been listening to, it was all about being an independent woman. So no surprise, I roll into my 20s. And like a lot of my friends, I was very much being an independent woman. And for me, a big part of that was to buy my own home. And I was saving for my deposit actually the whole way through my 20s. And then I reached a point at 28 when I'd had a couple of significant pay rises and I was in a position to get a mortgage. So I bought my home. I got my one-bedroom place in Brixton. And I moved in and I decorated everything. It was all cosmetic, but I did the filling and the sanding and the painting and the glossing. My dad came along and built a little built-in wardrobe for me because I had a very odd-shaped bedroom. I even did a feature wall, and I bought the furniture, and I sat in this new flat, and I realized about 3 months after I'd bought it that I just didn't feel great about the whole scenario. And if you look back at that roadmap, I was doing very, very well in my career. I was absolutely ticking off that definition of success. And I just bought my own home and furnished it. And yet I sat there and I felt deeply unfulfilled. This was actually the moment, and this was 12 years ago, this was the moment that I started to actually look. I didn't call it definitions of success at the time, but I started to look at what was it that I was following in life, and was it actually right for me? Because I felt like I'd been doing all of this stuff and been really doing very well at it. And yet I felt deeply dissatisfied. And in myself, I knew this wasn't really what I was going to be doing or should be doing. And the next few years was really a process of breaking that down and getting back to what was a correct definition of success for me. And that took me a bit of time of trial and error. And that's actually what I do with people inside the Purpose Pathway. It's just a much more distilled process based on experience. And then what I also know now with my training as a master hypnotist. And if you're sitting there going, what is the Purpose Pathway? The Purpose Pathway is my membership community for you to design life by your design. And it allows you to discover a whole new approach to purpose, to feel really clear and inspired and ready to move into whatever the next phase of your life is. And one of the things that we do in there, in the conscious lifestyle design module, is actually explore your definitions of success, both consciously and subconsciously, and what you want deeply at a heart level, what you truly, truly desire in your core. But let's go back to my scenario. So I started to then explore other things, because the reality is that even though society says that success is about buying a home, it wasn't actually success for me personally. I'd adopted that particular definition. I went at it full throttle and I achieved it. I channeled all my energy there. It's amazing when you place your focus somewhere what you can do. But then I achieved it, and then I realized that it wasn't really what was going to make me feel right, because it wasn't actually right for me. Now, what I want to just add here is it doesn't mean that somebody like me should not buy a house, because absolutely there is financial benefits to it. There's security benefits to it. There's a whole bunch of very logical and useful reasons for buying a home, but it doesn't deserve to sit in the definition of success. It's not something that I should be marking my success against. And the reality is, whatever your definition of success is where you're going to be channeling your energy. And as I said, my 20s was very much create this career and buy a house, channeled my energy there, and I got that. But perhaps where would I have gone if I channeled my energy elsewhere? Now, there's no regrets, and I believe firmly that everything we end up doing is all part of the journey that we are supposed to go on in this lifetime. That was what I was supposed to be doing in my 20s, and I learned a lot of great stuff. But I wasn't in alignment with my definition of success. And if you take a country like Australia, there is an awful lot of people who are actually evaluating their success subconsciously and consciously against whether they've purchased a home. And for a lot of them, they're not going to be able to do that very easily because of the nature of the housing market here. And actually, even if they did everything to get it, they'd find that it probably wouldn't give them the peace and fulfillment that they believe that it will give them. So that is that first scenario, when you've actually achieved the things, you've done all the things, and you still don't feel that satisfied. And for me, this was not just about buying the home. It was also where I'd got to in a career as well. So let's go to the second scenario. So this is the scenario where you've decided that you want to change something in your life, or perhaps you're trying to make that change, and yet you're finding that you can't get the momentum up behind it, or you're not really being able to create the change that you want. So this is where essentially you need to update your definition of success, because it's quite likely that you're still working to the original definition. So even though consciously you've made a decision that you're going to go in a different direction in whatever part of your life it is, subconsciously you're still working to the old definition. And if that's the case, you're not going to allow yourself to step into the behaviors and the actions and become the person who would create that new reality. So let's make this quite practical. Let's take something off of that roadmap that we've just discussed. Let's say you hold that very usual definition of success around career. And that definition of success is that you've worked your way up. And perhaps you've done that. You've actually worked your way up now to a level where you're really very successful and you earn great money and you've got a great job title and you manage people and you're just in a place that other people would look in at your career and go, you're doing really, really well. But now you've decided that you want to do something different. You actually want to walk away from that. Perhaps you want to start a business. Or perhaps you actually want to go and become a gardener or a painter or a baker. Or maybe you just want to go and do a job that has a little bit more impact. Could be anything like that. Just something that's different. Something that doesn't allow you, though, to continue moving up that ladder in the direction that you're going. Because let's be honest, it might require you to take a step down. It's definitely a step sideways, at least. It's potentially a decrease in income overall or for a period of time. You might have to do some retraining. You might not be the voice of authority anymore that you were in your current profession. So it doesn't fit with the definition of success that's still running. Your conscious mind might have said, hey, it's now time for us to go do something else, but you're still working at the old definition of success. And you'll see this when people do make that leap and they go on to start businesses. And you know how I said that you can, through repetition, you can learn as well. And so what they do is they actually get conditioned around new definitions of success. So they drop the old one about climbing the ladder at work and they take the leap and they go and do something different. But then they start to adopt another definition of success that isn't correct for them. So this is the scenario of someone who leaves, they perhaps train as a coach or they start a business or they do something independently. And then they start to create this definition of success around perhaps they want to be running $1 million business. That's correct for some people. But if you actually truly wanted to run your own business or leave that old job because you were seeking more lifestyle, you wanted a career, a job, a work life that provided lifestyle first and foremost, then really setting a goal of being $1 million business will conflict with that. So having that as a new definition of success is equally not going to be quite right for you. And what you'll find is that your subconscious mind doesn't line up behind that. And so month on month, you aren't going to hit those revenue figures that are going to deliver that definition of success because it's not yours either. So that's a couple of scenarios. And the third scenario is the one where you don't know what you want. This is such an interesting one. Everybody that I work with, and I work with people a lot on purpose and really kind of changing and redesigning their life, of which their work is often a really big component of that. But actually, I work with people across anything. They can have goals around health or romance or confidence or anything, really. It's really broad what you can do with hypnosis. In whatever scenario we're in, though, I will always ask the question, well, how do you want it to be? What do you want? What do you desire? And I can tell you that the vast majority of people will always tell me what they don't want. They can't tell me what they do want. They just know what they don't want. And actually what they tell me about what they don't want corresponds very much to the parts of the definition of success that they've adopted, but that doesn't really belong to them. And if you are finding that you are in a place where you know something needs to change, but when you really start to think about what you'd like it to be, all you can do is go around in circles around what you don't want it to be, i.e., I don't want to work X hours a week. I don't want to work for someone else. I don't want to be in a stressful job. I don't want to be in a job where I feel that I'm not having the impact and the contribution I want, or I don't want to be in a job where I'm not valued, or I don't want this and I don't want that. Then what you will find is that the definition of success that you're running to is actually capping and keeping you trapped in your thinking. And so being able to tap into the correct definition of success will help you open that out into what is it that I really, really want, and allow you to really program your subconscious mind behind that new definition. So your definition of success is a very critical part of living life by your design. Some of that success is actually going to be written into your human design. It's going to be in there in places. And what you'll find is that you've got definitions of success that are working with you at a conscious level, the stuff that if I ask you straight out, you're going to tell me, and then the stuff that is actually operating subconsciously and influencing you without you knowing. And then there's the other piece, the piece of really, really tapping into those definitions of success that feel absolutely right for you. And if you're looking to change your life, if you're looking to evolve any aspect of it, big or small, being really clear on what success would be like for you and only you, not what you've been told, what you think you should be doing, what you should be experiencing. That is the absolute power in this process. So if any of those scenarios resonate with you, that is, you've actually achieved a lot of things that you were told would make you successful, and yet you're not satisfied. Or perhaps you have decided to make some change, you're trying to make change, but you're not really finding the momentum behind it. Or you know you want to change, but you don't know what you want. In any of those scenarios, I really recommend that you dive deeply into your definition of success. And if what I've said interests you, and if the purpose pathway kind of tickles your interest, we are launching at the end of January. There's pre-registration happening right now. The reason you would want to pre-register is because it gives you first access, and you get 20% off of every one of your monthly payments going forward, which is quite significant. If you sign up to pre-register and you decide you don't want to join me in the purpose pathway, there's no obligation. But if you would like to pre-register and if you'd like to find out more, then there'll be links to that in the show notes. But essentially, you just need to go to michelleboyd.com/purpose and you come join me on that journey of getting to know yourself even more deeply. That's it from me today. Thank you for joining me. If you've got any questions at all, or if there's anything that you're sat there going, I'd really like you to do a podcast on that, send me a message. You can find me on Instagram, michelleboyd_hypnotist, or the Life by Your Design podcast. I look at both of those. You can send me a message and I would love to have a chat. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day.